You already know about the skull. Look at the bottom of this painting, that pale, smeared shape lying across the floor, like something spilled on the canvas. Stand to the side of it, walk past it, almost to the wall, and it snaps into focus. A human skull stretched across the feet of two young men. Moving through the highest circles of European power, it is the most famous visual puzzle in Western art. Holbein painted it in 1533 in a technique found nowhere else in his surviving work. One painting, one impossible image. And today it dominates the way we talk about the ambassadors. Here is what I want to suggest. The skull may be the least interesting secret in this room. Because while everyone has been standing at the side wall, squinting at a distorted skull, Holbein filled the rest of this painting with things almost nobody looks at. They are stranger, quieter. And one of them is so small and so specific that it was probably only ever fully understood by a handful of people on earth. So let us do what the skull has been stopping us from doing for centuries. Let us look at everything else. Start with the shelf between them. Two tiers and crowded with objects, and they are not decoration. On the upper shelf, instruments for reading the heavens, a celestial globe, sundials, sophisticated instruments for measuring stars, angles, and time. On the lower shelf, the earth, a terrestrial globe, books, a lute, a case of flutes, an open hymnal, heaven above, earth below, and two young men standing between them, surrounded by the instruments with which Renaissance Europe measured, mapped, and tried to understand the world. These are not random props. Together they evoke the quadrivium, the four mathematical arts: arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy. Holbein has laid out the mathematical curriculum of a Renaissance education and placed his sitters at its center. Now look closer at the lute. One of its strings is broken, snapped, hanging loose. An instrument in harmony could stand for a world in harmony. A broken string was a familiar image of discord, and that is how this one is usually read. And consider when this was painted, 1533. The year Henry VIII married Anne Boleyn. The year England was breaking from Rome. The year Europe's religious fracture became a crisis at the English court. One of these men is a French Catholic bishop. The other is the French ambassador to Henry's court, stationed in England. While that crisis unfolded, and between them, quietly, a broken string. Now look at the book beside it. It is a book of arithmetic, and it lies open to a section on division. Coincidence, perhaps, but in a painting made while Europe was dividing, it is difficult not to notice. Next to it, a case of flutes. Look at the lid. It is slightly open, and one flute is missing from the set, the suggestion of an ensemble that can no longer play together. And then there is the object that seems most out of place, an open hymnal, German, Lutheran, containing hymns written and adapted by Martin Luther, and painted so precisely that the words can still be read. Sit with that for a moment. Two French Catholics, one of them a bishop of the Roman Church, and lying open on their shelf in 1533 the hymn book of the man whose challenge had helped split Western Christendom apart. But look at what it is open to. One of those hymns is a call to the Holy Spirit, a prayer that can be heard as asking for divided believers to be gathered back together. So the shelf is not simply saying that everything is falling apart. It is holding two things at once: the broken string, the missing flute, the page on division, and beside them, a prayer that the break might still be healed. That is what makes this room so strange. It looks like a display of wealth and learning. Underneath, it is an argument about whether the world can be put back together. Now look up, top left corner, where the green curtain folds. There is something behind it. A crucifix, small, half swallowed by the fabric. You could look at this painting for an hour and never see it. It is not displayed the way the instruments are displayed. It is almost withdrawn from the picture, showing only enough of itself to be found by someone who is looking carefully. In a painting stacked with the finest achievements of human knowledge, the mapped heavens, the measured earth, the mathematics, the music, the painting's clearest image of redemption has been placed at its edge, almost out of sight, whether that was a statement and about faith retreating from the world or simply a matter of composition. Holbein does not tell us. He never tells us. He puts the thing in the room and steps back. That is worth pausing on, because it is the pattern of the man. Hans Holbein was a German painter who first arrived in England carrying letters of introduction. From Erasmus to Thomas More, he later rose to become king's painter to Henry VIII. His work brought him close to the most powerful and the most vulnerable figures at the Tudor court. He portrayed people who would later be imprisoned or executed. He portrayed a king reshaping the country's religion around his marriage and his succession. Holbein's response on the surface is precision. Look at the fur, the velvet, the metal instruments, the pattern of the carpet, and the individual hairs of a beard. Everything is rendered with extraordinary exactness, but exactness is not explanation. Holbein shows us what is present without telling us how the pieces fit together. That is why the objects matter. They are evidence, but not a confession. Holbein places them before us and leaves us to decide what kind of picture they make. Now, the strangest one, the terrestrial globe dull on the lower shelf, a small painted world tilted toward us. Look at it, as a 16th century viewer might have. A demonstration of knowledge and reach. Europe, the Mediterranean, the expanding routes of trade and empire, a world being measured, traveled, claimed, exactly the kind of object a man displays when he wants you to understand that he is a person of consequence. Now, look closer. Among the names painted across its surface, the cities, the kingdoms, the coastlines, Holbein has included one more. It is tiny. It sits in Champagne, in France, and it is not a capital, or a great center of power, or the kind of place you would expect to find marked on a globe. It is a hamlet. Policy. Policy was Jean de Dinteville's home, his estate, the chateau to which he carried this painting, and where it would remain, carefully preserved, for more than a century on a globe, holding countries and continents. Holbein gave that tiny place an extraordinary position, close to the center of the visible world. Think about the scale of that gesture. This is a picture more than 2 meters tall, containing the sciences of heaven and earth, the religious crisis of a continent, and a human skull stretched across the floor, and on a globe, small enough to hold in your hands. Holbein painted the name of one man's village. Most people standing in front of this painting would never understand why it is there. But at Policy, in that hall, Dinteville and his family would immediately have recognized it, their home, written into the world, close to its visible center. Now, go back and look at the whole painting again. We are usually told that this picture is about death, that the skull is a memento mori, a warning that all this knowledge, all this wealth, all this power must end. And it is. But look at what Holbein actually built here. And a second question appears, not what does this painting mean, but who is able to see it? Because each of these details has its own condition of visibility. The skull requires a physical position. You must leave the place where a viewer normally stands. the crucifix requires attention. It is almost lost behind the curtain. The instruments require an education in astronomy and mathematics. The arithmetic book requires someone who notices where Holbein has opened it. The hymnal requires German and enough religious knowledge to feel the shock of finding Luther between two Catholics. And policy requires something none of the others do. It requires knowing the man. Holbein did not simply hide things in this painting. He gave each of them a different key, an angle, a language, an education, a history, an intimacy. The same picture opens differently for every person who stands before it, and no single viewer holds all of it at once. He was working in a court where convictions could turn dangerous and powerful men could vanish in that world, and meaning was rarely simple, and not everything needed to announce itself. So the skull is not the secret of this painting. The skull is the one you were meant to find, the one that teaches you this is a painting worth looking at sideways. Everything else is still waiting.